welcome back to Liquid Lunch. Now we get to settle in. We're just going to settle in here. It's like we're sitting in the living room. We've got Monty Cantsin, aka Istvan Kantor, joining us, and of course Sasha sitting in and going to help us conduct this conversation. And we had you here a couple weeks ago, Istvan, and but now we're going to talk about two things today, right?
Yeah, two specific ideas. Sasha actually proposed these subjects. The Hungarian Revolution, which was my childhood.
Right. that had to be a formative. How old were you, Istvan, when that happened? How old were you when the revolution?
I was 7 years old.
So you remember it, obviously.
Oh, I totally remember. That was, as I said, the most important event in my childhood, basically my childhood, yeah.
So, I mean, we could probably talk about that all day. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6 o'clock.
And you've got that shirt, and you've got the same symbol on this book.
And this book has the 6 o'clock symbol, the Rivington School, a New York-based artist group.
So we're going to get into all that. What I found curious was that when I looked at these two topics today, I realized that they were both numbers, right?
True.
1956.
Yeah.
And
Very important
6
number.
o'clock, right? So, okay. So we got to hear the whole story. So, what's your recollection of the whole thing? It must have been, obviously, it had a big impact on you. Everybody
it was
who lived through it.
What I can say, a traumatic experience for a child. A very important. It has marks on me, very important marks that stayed with me forever. And I was born into a generation. I was born in 1949 into a generation that basically became the first communist generation in Hungary. Mm-hmm. Communism in Hungary starts in 1949. So we, as kids, inherited the Second World War. I mean, the remains of the Second World War, all the destruction, the ruins and the decay. That's what we saw in the streets and in all Budapest, in our environment, and that's where we were playing. So we got used to this kind of life of living in the ruins, and that actually really inspired us, and I still learned from this experience, and my art is very much connected with it.
So you were part of the Soviet bloc back then.
Hungary. Exactly. The Hungary was occupied by the Russian. That's why the revolution happened, because Hungarians rebelled against the Russian occupation and demanded that the Russian army leaves Hungary.
So 1956, that was the beginning of the revolution?
October 23rd, the revolution started at 6 o'clock.
Oh, that's
evening.
it. So, I see.
Here's the mystery of 6 o'clock.
I say that it is true. Actually, there was a big demonstration in the afternoon by students and intellectuals and leading workmen groups, and that turned into basically the revolution by 6 o'clock in the evening, and then the people occupied the radio and important strategical places in Budapest and declared the beginning of the revolution and independence. Yeah.
At the end of a 6-day fight that astonished the world and shook the Kremlin to its foundations, Hungary was free to fraternize on its own borders, and Russian supplies to the stricken city of Budapest along roads littered with burnt-out red tanks, disabled by almost unarmed men fired by passion for liberty. Flaring swiftly from student demonstrations into open revolution, the pent-up hatreds of oppression sent Russian might reeling and forced withdrawal of the red yoke. But even as these scenes were recorded, rumors flared of the re-entry of Russian forces and new fighting. The beautiful city of Budapest, scarred by conflict, again faces a Russian onslaught, even before the debris of the fight for freedom is cleared from the streets. In startling developments, Hungary broke with the satellite Warsaw Pact military alliance, announced neutrality, and pleaded for priority on the United Nations agenda. Then word came that Russian forces were massing and all communication with the West was cut off. Hungary's newfound freedom is menaced before the martyrs of revolution go to their rest.
Did they barricade the streets? Is that?
Yeah, there were barricades all over, and they immediately went to all the army centers and took all the guns and everything. So the next day already there were armed forces of the revolution.
And that Soviet presence that was still from the Second World War?
Yeah, the Soviets came in the Second World War and never left.
Right.
So, you know, 45 was the end of the war, and they were still there in 1956. So the Hungarian, actually the communists were leading this revolution, basically.
The Hungarian
a
communists.
coalition leading, yeah, the Hungarian, all the workmen and the peasants and everybody,
Right.
they wanted the Russians to leave us alone and have Hungary to create their own democracy. So obviously what happened is that the Russians for a few days moved out their army, making it look like everything is okay, and then moved back a couple of days or a week later with a much huger army and crushed the revolution.
Now, where were you? I'm just curious because you know Budapest is divided into Buda and
Buda and
Pest,
Pest, yeah.
right? Just curious, what side were you on?
Pest, yeah.
On the Pest side, okay.
Pest. And actually we were right in the kind of middle downtown, very occupied by revolutionaries, and there were embassies, so there was lots of traffic of military tanks and armed people and fights.
And were you out there in the crowd?
No, we spent most of our time in the air raid shelter, which was an amazing experience for kids. In
Right.
the building where we lived with my family, there were lots of kids, many families on each floor. It was a small building, 3 floors, and there was a small air raid shelter, and that's where we moved in when bombs were falling and it was dangerous to be in your apartment.
So was there bombs or shelling going
yeah,
on?
Everything. Just like it was basically pretty much like a war zone,
Yeah.
and very lots of danger. So yeah, we spent time in the air raid shelter, and I loved it. And that was
What was so good about it as a 7-year-old kid?
first of all a very different experience in the community, because we all the people from the building were together, and there were lots of kids, and we all played together happily while our parents were worrying about how to feed us and clean us.
For the
and,
kids,
you
it's
know,
great, right?
The kids was it was great.
Wait, could I just tell you a little story? You remember
Sure.
the Cuban Missile Crisis, right?
Yeah.
So I was like 3 years old or something like that. My parents were watching it on TV. I didn't know what was going on, right? They said, oh, because it got pretty tense there, right?
Right.
And they said, oh, we're going to be sleeping in the basement tonight because they thought there might be a nuclear war, right? And then
Right.
later on that night, I go, so aren't we sleeping in the basement? I was looking forward to it, right? They said,
Right.
no, the crisis is over."
Same with us. Yeah.
So how long has the uprising been going on in '56?
It was very short, actually. It was nothing more than like a couple of weeks. In the beginning of November, the Russian tanks came back, and crushed the revolution within a few days. It went on for a while, and in the countryside, still the fight was continuing, but Budapest was pretty much occupied by November 10. I don't remember exactly the dates. If somebody interested in the whole story, there is tons of information. You
And
can
so-
Google the Hungarian Revolution 1956. Yeah, let's just keep talking about maybe my own experience, because that's what I
Yes,
because
yes.
you
remember
sounded
well.
like you're having a great time there in the bomb
Yeah.
shelter.
And one interesting thing, I think I already told you about that, and here is my little gun.
Yes,
for-
the episode when you've
Right.
confronted the Russian army.
That's it, yeah. What happened during the revolution is that little kids, like between like 7 and 15, were part of the revolutionary army, and they sacrificed themselves to the revolution, and they made a Molotov cocktail and throw it to the Russian tanks and things like that, and often they also get killed by the Russian soldiers. So there were lots of heroic little kids, and I imagine myself maybe I should be, like kids are like that. They really want to
Right.
be heroes.
Yeah, yeah.
So my grandfather made me a little toy gun, not this one. This is a replica of the gun that he made me, and I made this replica for the 50th anniversary of the Hungarian Revolution, because the other one, it was destroyed. So what happened is that one day I slipped out somehow from the air raid shelter without telling my parents or my friends, and went into the street with this, not this, but a toy gun, a wood gun. And as I reached the street from the building, there was a convoy coming. Well, there were convoys coming, going.
Of Russian
but there,
military.
Of Russian military, yeah.
Was it tanks?
Yeah, led by an armored car, a smaller. And I, like an instinct, went behind that tree that was in front of, and it's still there, exactly at the same place. Actually, I have a picture, and I can send it to you. And I went behind that tree and pointed my gun right to the convoy. And they stopped. And a soldier came out from the car, jumped out, and came towards me, and he said, "Idi suda," which means
come here.
Come here, yeah. And at that moment, I ran back to the
to the air shelter.
I ran back and hid in the darkest place.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't go back to the air raid shelter, but in the basement, I knew our building, and I found the darkest place to hide. So the Russians surrounded the building, pointed their guns to the buildings, and it took a long time for the janitor and other people who spoke some Russian to negotiate, because they were looking for the little boy with the gun. And so after finally they left, and the people in the air raid shelter were like, really upset, especially at my grandfather that he made me this gun. And ritualistically they destroyed, they broke my little toy gun, which was so dangerous.
And so, how did you? First of all, what was going through your mind while you were hiding?
Well, a kid hiding is like.
No, I was more.
Not really. I was.
What was going through your mind when you were pointing gun at the tank?
That was going to my mind, that I was with those kids who are also fighting against
Right,
the
right.
Russian, and I was
Being
stimulated by that idea, of course, and all the anti-Russian sentiments. I was inside in the air raid shelter,
Right.
Yeah.
So
And
it
then-
left impression on you as a child that then
I think, yeah,
Impacted you as an artist.
it was my first clash with authorities, like real big authorities, and that stayed with me. And I think that's why I often look forward to this kind of situations, like when I go into a museum and I splash my blood on the wall and immediately have to face authorities, but I don't escape. I stay there and I face them. So when I was a child, obviously I had to somehow, I didn't have yet a developed way of defending myself, so I didn't know what to do exactly. So defense meant that I had to escape and hide. No,
right.
I kind of changed, obviously, my
strategy.
and probably I still want to revenge authority.
So but
This kind of childhood experience put me into this
So
constant-
revenge against authority. I mean,
Yeah.
a rebellion.
a rebellion.
is that the same as anarchy?
No.
In the good sense.
In a good sense? Perhaps. I mean,
No,
we were
anarchy.
talking-
Anarchy is more like you do what you want to do, and
It's
it's
totally-
my
Well,
own
there are-
business. Versus like rebellion, it's rebellion against some kind of oppression or some kind
But
of
Istvan said in the
injustice.
last interview, what Neoism all about, one of the things is total freedom,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what anarchy is.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? It's like
Yeah.
the authorities need to serve me
well,
rather than the other way around.
yeah, total freedom versus the rebellion, a revolutionary act against some kind of opposition or oppression or whatever like that.
Injustice.
Injustice, yeah. So that scene that's happened in Budapest, that's 1956 you were
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah.
So that and so did that cause that revolutionary theme throughout your later life?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I made lots of it because it's a very important moment in my life that revolution, it came into my artistic productions many times. It's always with me. I always, it's a source, constant source.
So you're trying to recreate that revolutionary moment in a controlled, like gallery settings. Is that the idea?
That's what I figure. That's what I figure. When you have a traumatic experience, you never know when it comes out and causes some kind of reaction to it. I'm reacting back to 50 years or whatever, which is.
Now, what about this idea? Now, in my family, Istvan, we've talked a lot of discussion about the Hungarian Revolution, and one of the
Because your wife is Hungarian.
yeah, and her parents came here in '56.
Yeah,
They escaped
right,
during the revolution.
Like
so-
100,000 of people,
yeah.
Yeah.
Which was a great loss for Hungary,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Many of the best and the brightest people left.
But it's a good thing for the world because there are tons of Hungarians
Yeah.
all over, from Australia to Canada to the United States and so on.
Absolutely. But one of the ideas that they seem to talk about is that the failed revolution, which the Hungarian Revolution
Yeah.
was, are
It was a
often
fail.
the most successful.
Absolutely. Failed revolutions, I always say, are the real revolutions because failed revolutions don't turn into dictatorships, because
Right,
what
right.
happens that after a revolution, the revolution followed by dictatorship that basically destroys the
Idealism.
idealism
Yeah.
of the revolution, and all what the revolution established are eliminated.
Right.
As the saying goes, a violent revolution brings violent people in charge.
So I always say, long live the spirit of failed revolutions.
Amen.
There you go, right? Because some people also said that after the revolution, because of that, the Russians they had to be very respectful of Hungary and they didn't, they
I don't
more
think
than
that
other countries
they were
perhaps.
very respectful. they maybe didn't want more revolutions, and so they gave the Hungarian community a little bit of more freedom, if I can talk about freedom. What meant is that the political system was not as dictatorial as in other communist or occupied countries.
Right.
It's very difficult to talk about communism because I grew up as a communist. Like as I said, I was born into communism, and then obviously I was brought up by the government in schools as a good communist, young communist, and I was a leader in my school and followed and the
Were you a
instructions.
pioneer?
Well, I was a pioneer, and
Yeah, I was a pioneer
I was in the
You had read-
I was in the Young Communist Party
Yeah.
up until age 18, when I kind of changed my mind and became more. I had more knowledge and more contact with people who helped me to get rid of all the brainwashing I received throughout my childhood, and I got double teachings, because at home I was completely told in a very different way than in school. There was a dualism going on. In school, you had to believe what they said, and at home, you had to believe what your parents said. So you were kind of in a conflict sometimes.
So your parents, they weren't necessarily giving you the
No, my
Communist
parents
Party
were
life.
not communists. My parents were like high middle class people. My father was a scientist, and my grandfather suffered a lot from the Russian occupation, because he was so-called capitalist that lost everything. And
So,
you know.
I mean, I'm just curious though. So you had the opposite kind of cultural programming at home. Just curious. So, but you obviously bought into it. The propaganda you were given at school.
Yeah.
By the sound of it.
Yeah,
So-
I liked it. I liked the community. They were successful, these organizations, communist organizations, to bring people, young people, and let them play together, doing games together, going to camps together, and having a good time. So I kind of enjoyed that type of life, and I was very good in speaking and talking and convincing people. So they thought in me, they thought that I was going to be a good leader for
Right.
the future or something like that, and they tried to force me into that communist demagogue thinking and being, but fortunately I was not that
Obedient.
obedient.
So okay, now now we see this symbol, the 6 o'clock symbol, which is obviously the moment that the revolution began, and it's on the cover of your book, which is called
The
Rivington.
Rivington
So
School,
what's that
80s
all
New
about?
York underground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That's an impressive volume.
yeah, it's almost 300 pages, and it basically covers the whole 80s in the Lower East Side, which was the revolutionary, creative center of New York in the 80s, and where everything happened. So I got involved with the Rivington School in the 80s, in the mid 80s, when I moved to New York and started working with them. This was a group of artists, all kind of different sculptures, painters, street artists mostly, and musicians, etc. They occupied a lot in the corner of Forsyth and Rivington Streets, which is the kind of heart of the Lower East Side. And on this big lot, surrounded by ruins of buildings or ruined buildings, we created a sculpture garden that was made completely from scrap metal and all kind of junk what we found in the streets. It was a big maze of found objects, let's say it this way, but also very high. And so that became almost like a monument of new artistic movement, which was the Rivington School. And what was more closer to the 6 o'clock idea, that the group usually met in the evenings at 6 o'clock. You know, people stop working, 6 o'clock is kind of happy hour, and you go and have a drink with your friends. So we gathered together in this lot and had a couple of beers and was talking and making art and having a very creative time. And so we started to glorify the idea of 6 o'clock. And 6 o'clock, you know, on the clock it's a vertical two-sided arrow, which captured my imagination a lot. And because today we live in a non-linear world. Linear progress and linear time, it's kind of out. Yeah. We are not talking about, in the internet especially, everything is happening at the same time and everything is accumulating at the same time. So this idea of past, present and future, it's kind of, it doesn't work. Everything is accumulating and extending more vertically as the 6 o'clock arrow, instead of going linearly
in a horizontal.
So
right.
That's why the 6 o'clock is a better symbolical sign.
So when was the first time you used it? How?
6 o'clock?
Yeah, as a symbol.
I think it's 1985, around when the 6 o'clock, we started using the 6 o'clock symbol. Yeah.
Along with the flaming iron?
No, flaming iron started in 1980.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
The
the
6
flaming
o'clock
iron is earlier.
Yeah. The flaming iron is earlier. The 6 o'clock sign came when I moved to New York and joined the Rivington School, and I became spokesman. And as a spokesman, I also had to explain the 6 o'clock. And I made speeches. And in my speeches, I was talking that, people, here I'm standing in front of you, I'm standing with you people, you are part of me. I have been telling you to this day, without me life has no meaning, I'm the best friend you'll ever have. Do you know what time is it? Do you know what time is it, Kevin?
6 o'clock.
Exactly, it's 6 o'clock, because 6 o'clock is happiness, 6 o'clock is love and joy, 6 o'clock is when you do what you like, ahora neoismus. And then I also thought that I have to give some kind of more scientific than only poetic response to the question, why 6 o'clock or what is 6 o'clock? So I kind of came up with a few ideas. One of them is the subatomic particles, I mean quantum mechanics, quantum physics. In quantum physics, subatomic particles, a subatomic particle can be at two places at the same time. Mm-hmm. You know, like imagine that one in the past and one in the future. So
a spooky reaction at a distance.
That makes it immediately think that there is no past and future, everything is happening at the same time. Past equals present equals future. So that's, there is a...
Also 6 when
there is a very important physicist, British physicist, Julian Barbour, who wrote a book, The End of Time, I think that's the title of the book, and he is talking about that in a very scientific ways. Time is a perception, basically, and that's how we grew up learning everything through the time what we are using in today's society. But if a prisoner goes to prison and is in a room all alone and without windows or whatever for a long time, this person gets completely confused and don't know anything about time.
It's a circadian rhythms,
Yeah.
something like that.
Definitely, yeah. And the blood and everything what is flowing inside your body, it helps you in certain ways to connect yourself to that perception of time what we are talking
And
about.
it's also when we're on the surface of the Earth. If we're, like, say, going under the ground and isolate from electromagnetic waves, then it also disrupts the circadian rhythms.
Yeah, they did
as
some
well.
experiments,
Right,
and
yeah, they
people
did.
got away from the 24-hour. They started approaching a 48-hour cycle.
And they didn't feel so well.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so there are, and there is one more visual explanation I always like to tell about 6 o'clock, that take a movie that is like 90 minutes, you know, and a movie is made from frames, and each frame has like 24, each second has 24 frames. And now I cut up that movie to frames, and here is the movie, all the frames. I don't know how many thousands of frames, hundreds of thousands. And now instead of watching that movie from the beginning to the end, you know, for an hour and a half, I take these frames and throw them up really high. And as they are falling, I see them all together because I have this kind of digital electronic eyes that I can see tons of things at the same time. So I see the movie at the same time, all the frames. Maybe not in the same, each time I throw them up, I see a different movie, the different kind of arrangement episodes, but I see the movie at the same time, exactly at the same time as they are falling towards me, these little frames. So I eliminated
linear time.
the linear time. It's a symbolical way of explaining, obviously, and I kind of visualize it through this example.
Well, it says the
Very
6 o'clock.
poetic.
I was drinking with punks on the corner in the Kensington Market, and then if there's a cops arrive, they'll be like the 6 o'clock. You know, and that's the code word for the police, because police has 6 letters in it. So the punks heads up for it at 6 o'clock. Hey, 6 o'clock. That's why I said it's like a robotic machine
And also,
rebellion.
the heads up is 6 o'clock. Yeah,
Right,
like
right.
This is the 6 o'clock kind of saying hi to each other when you are a neoist. You put up your hands and stand up, and that's the 6 o'clock. You know, the vertical sign.
You know, it kind of reminds me of when we talk about perspective in art, right? Which was very getting really used to that idea of the linear progression,
Right.
And then we had we went beyond that,
Right.
And that was a representation of, it's not about the line, it's about, but before that you had it was less linear before,
Yeah.
so we got into the linear, and now we're coming out of the linear.
Like, I never wanted to. Neoism is not part of the historical avant-garde that follows the linear changes. Like,
Right.
there was Impressionism and
Like progression.
Dadaism and Fluxus and pop art and all these things in different times. And then came Neoism that took all these in, because now it's there is no linear time, but all these historical movements still exist inside this accumulation of information, but it is now Neoism.
So, okay, and then like earlier, I was at your son's post-wedding party, and you presented him with your grandfather's clock,
Right.
pocket watch, a golden watch.
Yeah.
That is, when it stopped working, it stopped at 6 o'clock. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's another interesting story. That's true. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I gave this beautiful pocket watch to my son's wedding a couple of days ago, a week ago, and that pocket watch I was playing with as a child many times. My grandfather's pocket watch, and I loved that, gold watch, and I always asked him, can I play with it? And he let me play with it. And one day what happened is that the pocket watch disappeared. I was probably 4 years old or something like that. And nobody knew where is the pocket watch. It's a gold pocket watch that is actually expensive. And the pocket watch disappeared for years when my mom, who cleaned up my room from the toys I was playing before, hold up a toy car, a little truck made from wood, and as she was holding it, she heard some noise inside, and she turned it over, and from the front of the toy truck, the gold pocket watch followed. And she took it from the floor, and it stopped, and it was at 6 o'clock, and ever since it didn't work. And I just gave it to Babylon, and it's on 6 o'clock, and Babylon was born at 6 o'clock. I was born at 6 o'clock as well.
Wow.
So,
That is, I mean, so what do you think the meaning of all that coincidence or synchronicity?
well,
or
hence
whatever you
the
wanna
6
call it?
o'clock symbolism.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I kind of feel that there is something to. It is really not just poetry, but there is something beyond that, and that's why I say you have to read Julian Barbour's The End of Time. Very interesting book. Very interesting. He was a student of Einstein, obviously, and also a friend of Steve Hawkins, and
Right.
a very important scientist of today who actually right into 6 o'clock research.
Well, speaking of science, the 6 is the number of carbon. Yeah, that's on the periodic table
Oh,
of
really?
elements.
6 is carbon.
And we are
That's
carbon-based
interesting.
life
And we're
forms.
carbon-based life forms, right?
I would like to know, I want to see if we can find something that people who are watching this can take away from this 6 o'clock, from the idea of the end of time, because I think that people talk about it's the end of history now, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of feels that way, and even the idea of when you think about modern art, that's art being conscious of itself as being in the present.
We even call
And
it
where do you go from there?
postmodern.
Now we're in postmodern. That means you're
Post-future.
You're beyond being conscious of where you stand in history.
Yes, it is because of the media and all the mediatic society, and that we are here and talking about all these things, and immediately this information what we're talking about gets all over the world through this information system, and so that's what creates the idea that no history anymore, because in the old times to get some information from one place to another took years and years.
And there was an official history, right? Now,
Yeah.
everybody's got a
Right.
different version of history.
Right.
That's it also, yeah, definitely.
Even you go to Wikipedia, there are conflicting articles there.
Well, there's no official story anymore. Right?
Right.
So, what does that mean? And are we gonna lose our clocks eventually? Because
Yeah.
people talk about the clock came in and it regulated mankind.
Now it's
and
Facebook
it-
time. It's everybody have their own story to tell.
Yeah. Break your chains. Demand your rights. Stop on your clock. Step on your clock. Stomp on it.
That's
Well, we
right.
don't
It's
even
the
have-
end of 9 to 5.
Well, yeah, for sure. It's like, wait, 9 to 5 doesn't even make sense anymore.
Or
For
That's-
so many people.
Freedom
right?
55.
Rebellion against time is not new, obviously. Like Nietzsche declared in some ways when he declared that there is no God. God is dead. It's basically almost the same thing, that time is dead as well, because time is the biggest representative of God, obviously, and that creates everything, and the dictator of all the activities in society.
Do you think it's a complete breakdown I mean, it is a breakdown of the old systems, but do you think that there's going to be any kind of new, I hate to use the word order, that comes to be, or is it going to be a continual breakdown? And then and what does that give us, or where do we go from there?
Well, I think because of the continued close communication between people and so many different ideas being present, and people are not anymore restricted to one kind of ideology like before, that the communists were able to take over through their dictatorship and brainwash everybody very easily, because of they controlled all the media, the radio and television, and that was easy. But now, because of we control our own basically information system, or we can do that, that is taking us in a society where everybody has their own. We are transmission machines. Basically, that's what it is. We are all individual transmission machines. We transmit information, not only heat and light and electricity, but also ideas, not only through our brain waves, but also through our little machinery, telephones, and whatever we create, digital digital information supports that we have. And our bodies getting modified through these gadgets, let's say it this way. And so we are becoming modified pretty much into the system that makes us perhaps much efficient transmitters.
It's not capitalism versus communism, it's capitalism and communism. You need both. You need your wants and your needs together. It's not like after your
and then
needs.
comes the neo-ists who want to get out from that system completely and say refuse, deny, negate, and restart from a different aspect of the whole thing, much more creative and less based on these
Rhetoric.
yeah.
Or that could be a control mechanism. What do they call that? The Hegelian.
Hegelian dialectics.
But you are talking about more of human needs that we have to substantially create for everybody, like for survival and things. What I was talking about is more like the information that we project and share, and that is completely free. Meanwhile, you have to still buy your food and buy your clothes and pay for your rent, and
right.
the rentagon is there to control you, but the information is independent, and you can find the ways to create your own system of information.
Well, even I draw a big distinction. We're getting off on another topic, but between capitalism and free market, right? Because
Right.
free market is people decide what they want, but
Right.
when you got capitalism, meaning that the people with the money call the shots,
Right.
that's not really a free market.
Exactly, yeah. Then it's just a war term without the substance, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get to the moment that hedge fund managers become artists because they can make more money through art than through the banks, or real estate agents become artists because they can make more money with art, taking them art pieces to auctions than selling houses. And that's what's happening today.
Are you sure? Because most of the people that I know were artists that became real estate agents because there's more money in that.
Really? No.
Right.
Lately, it's changed. Lately, I can tell you, it changed lately, and lots of hedge fund managers are turning into artists. Yeah.
Well, because they have their, it's
And
the commercial
real-
art, it's the art backed by some
Real
deep
estate
pockets.
agents are there to produce artists and make money through the art. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, guys. I think we should probably think about wrapping this up. But so let's leave people with something here. Like Istvan, you've got the book. We should probably tell people where they can get it, or
Yeah.
if you've got anything coming up, let us know. And
Yeah, this is the book, The Rivington School, 80s New York Underground, with a 6 o'clock on it. And I edited it, and it was published by Black Dog in London. And unfortunately, it's not in the stores yet, but you can order it on Amazon already. And it will be from September. You can buy it in bigger bookstores.
fantastic! It
I'm
looks
sure.
great. It looks
Yeah.
like a
Can
great
you flip it for
coffee
the
table
camera?
book. I mean, I could probably
Yeah.
spend
Well, we're gonna put
a
some
lifetime
pictures.
just going
yeah.
through that book.
Yeah, we can take some pictures out of this.
Yeah, and we'll
maybe.
put it up
Yeah,
for
and
the
we'll
people
put
to
it
see.
up. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All
Well, thanks.
Great.
Hey,
Thank you, Istvan.
thank you.
Let us know what
It's
else you're
always
up
6
to.
o'clock.
It's okay. So thank you. Thanks, Sasha, for doing this. Thank you, Joseph. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all next time, right here on thatchannel.com.
Hey.